In the middle of 2016, a strong rumor broke out because of Michael Douglas. In an interview, the actor from iconic films like Basic Instinct mentioned that Val Kilmer had cancer. This triggered a flood of reactions. Immediately, Kilmer's admirers expressed their concern on social media, where they also showed themselves to be torn by the news. The more sensationalist media spun the supposed diagnosis with more speculation than certainties. To satisfy the morbid curiosity of their viewers, they tried to put up pictures where the person who had once played Batman clearly looked worse for wear. Kilmer's reaction also did not take long. From his Facebook account, he would write, and I quote, "I love Michael Douglas, but he is misinformed. I do not have any type of cancer." However, that statement, as it would later be known, was a half-truth. The actor was in remission at the time. He had kept the disease as far away from the public eye as possible and was stoically fighting against it. In fact, he was probably only forced to admit it because of a detail that no one could overlook. His voice had changed, his very particular tone. One that he had showcased in the movie The Doors, where he had dared to dub Jim Morrison in the musical scenes, had completely disappeared. For this reason, he later confessed that he had suffered from acute throat cancer. However, he also made sure to highlight that he himself had recovered faster than anyone would have suspected. When asked about it, did he not hesitate to say that his treatment had been faith? Although he had taken a hard hit, everyone was happy for him, and there were quite a few who started to ask questions. In what other projects could this versatile and chameleon-like artist be seen? The actor had escaped a cruel fate, at least for a while. A few years later, death would return, this time relentlessly. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. How did Kilmer become a 90s icon? What were his beginnings like, and what tough family blow did he have to go through in his early years? Why was he talked about as a difficult person on set? What were his last years like? What is known about his love life? To try to answer these and other questions, we are going to retrace a path that will take us to April 1st, 2025, the day Val Kilmer passed away. Before we continue, I'd like to know which Kilmer films you remember most fondly. Let's remember that he starred in great comedies, biopics, mind-blowing, police, westerns, and dramas. I'll read your comments, and now let's get started. December 31st, 1959. The Kilmers celebrated not only the end of the year, but also the arrival of one of their sons, whom they named Val. Edward, Eugene, and Gladys. The parents of the newborn belonged to the middle class. He was an aerospace equipment distributor and she, a real estate promoter, working from sunup to sundown to make sure nothing was missing in the place. Who already had another child named Mark, and soon a third would be added, who they would name Wesley. For a while, the Kilmers were happy. They planned vacations, made efforts to enlarge their house, and took on the task of instilling values in their little ones. The philosophical concepts of Christian Science, a religious and spiritual doctrine that is based on the Bible and seeks to cure diseases. It was founded in the 19th century by Mary Baker Eddy. Although its followers claim it is a science that interprets and demonstrates God's laws, its practice is unrelated to the scientific method. The children of the clan grew up letting their imagination run wild and soon felt an early connection with cinema. Television fictions were going through a strong peak, and Val, along with his brothers, consumed all these adventures with wonder, for which there seemed to be no limits. They liked immersing themselves in those fantasies so much that sooner rather than later, they were able to get a camera and started making their own films. Among other things, they dedicated themselves to parodying their favorite movies in them. Simultaneously, they forged a strong friendship and became a team. While Wesley developed an increasingly deep love for directing, Val felt that his thing was theater. Despite his shyness, participating in a student play showed the boy how free he could feel on a stage, and he decided that there would be his future. However, by the end of the 60s, the brothers received a hard blow, the divorce of their parents. This was painful for them and changed much of their routine, but at least they were still together. At 12 years old, Val finally got his love for acting recognized, and after participating in an audition, he managed to star in a hamburger commercial. He was congratulated by everyone, yet felt frustrated. He said the job had been empty and that the character he had to play didn't have a clear motivation, taking the fun out of the matter. The older ones laughed at these words, reminding the little one that he should relax and learn to enjoy. Only Wesley offered him understanding and words of encouragement. This made a deeper bond woven between them. Val used to proudly say that his brother was going to be a film director who would revolutionize the seventh art. He was, in some way, his guide and support. That's why what happened in 1977 was devastating for him. That year, Wesley, who was 15 years old, suffered an epilepsy attack and drowned in a pool. This made Val feel lost and put everything he had trusted up to that point into crisis. For a few weeks, darkness invaded his thoughts and he believed that he would never find comfort again. Then he had a revelation. The death of his brother only showed him the fragility of life and the need not to let time pass by. Val had disconnected from his feelings and knew that he could only feel alive again if he followed his instinct. That's how he entered the prestigious Juilliard acting school, from which other great stars like Kevin Spacey would also graduate. At that moment, Val became the youngest student ever accepted into that institution. His conviction was clear, however, he still had several storms to weather. Val was held in high regard by most of his teachers at the art conservatory. His restless spirit had led him to be chosen to lead several works, and he had even written some scripts. It was noticeable that he understood the dramatic growth that has to accompany every story, and he was involved in a very personal quest. But he was still missing something. Even though he had all the attributes to be an outstanding student, Ball renounced that. Instead of showing pride in his achievements, he was elusive. He said the establishment's pace depressed him. They provided good tools, but something more essential to acting was still missing in his challenges. He was sleepless at night, feeling constantly unsatisfied. Nothing in his surroundings seemed to excite him. Around that time, two things happened simultaneously. On one hand, a prestigious producer who was visiting the school discovered him. This brought Val to Broadway, where he acted alongside Kevin Bacon and Sean Penn. At the same time, the young man met a woman more than 10 years older than him at a party. He would fall in love with her and learn a lot from her. As he'd say, this woman would rekindle his inner fire. We're talking about none other than the singer Cher, with whom the actor would start a relationship that would last even after his career had already taken off. After Broadway and his Shakespeare performances, Ball impressed new producers. This time, he received the call he had always awaited. Hollywood had a proposal for him. Unknowingly, his acceptance was the first step to becoming an icon for an entire generation. An icon who was not exempt from varied controversies. The first leading role that would come into Val Kilmer's life would be that of a comedy, and not just any comedy. It was a film that parodied the musicals starring Elvis Presley and the spy movies from the time of World War II. Top Secret had arrived in the world, and with it the face of Val Kilmer, who soon charmed the audience with his ability not only to act but also to sing and dance. Kilmer again had issues with the character's psychology. On this occasion he understood the character's quest, but the tone of the movie did not help him explore other feelings he believed to be vital. The matter left him bittersweet. Though he'd always defend theater over cinema, the screen wouldn't release him. In 1985 he was offered a role in Blue Velvet, a film by cult director David Lynch. At that time, working with Lynch was synonymous with prestige, as it was a less rigid narrative cinema and more experimental. It seemed like what Ball had been seeking. However, after reading the script, the actor preferred to step aside, claiming that the story did not fully engage him. The same thing happened when director Tony Scott showed him the idea he was working on. It was a love story, full of drama and romance that promised great aerial stunts and a stunning soundtrack. The project was named Top Gun. Again, Val treated the project as something worthless. Until Scott, who wanted it to bring Iceman to life and was not willing to give in, proposed to give the character more and more dramatic weight. The other agreed, possibly more out of financial obligations than enthusiasm, but when the shooting came, he again showed his meticulousness, and both the movie and his name and those of many actors in the film like Tom Cruise began to headline all the magazines and posters in the city. Fame had hit him suddenly, in very few steps. What many pursued all their lives had come to him long before he turned 30. Journalists and critics were full of praise for Val, who began to miss his younger brother more and more. Only she could have understood the discomfort his success brought him in that way. He half fell in love with other projects that followed, such as Billy the Kid or Willow, produced by George Lucas. And just when Val thought he should resign himself to not finding his real place, he found out that Oliver Stone was preparing a movie about Jim Morrison, the singer of The Doors. Alone at home, Val got appropriate clothes and characterized himself as the famous musician. He analyzed his movements, speech, and gestures. With this, he made a home test and sent it to the relevant producers. Receiving that tape was strange for the filmmakers, but they decided to give the actor a chance. It's worth clarifying that they were not at all convinced, at least until they saw Val's live performance. Then they were fascinated. Even the original members of The Doors would mention how similar Kilmer was to Morrison, both physically and his excellent vocal work. It was 1991, and the actor was finally beginning to forge the career he had dreamed of. Only that, along with stardom, he would also begin to carve out a reputation as a difficult person. One of the first to speak of Val Kilmer's character would be Oliver Stone himself, who, while appreciating his professionalism on set, would add, and I quote, "Val Kilmer. He speaks in a way that is driven from within, and he doesn't always realize how the things he says will sound to another person." The actor continued to show obsession with every role he accepted and often justified his problematic behaviors by saying he was too much of a perfectionist. However, regardless of the rumors, the big studios kept knocking on his door. That's why classics like Tom Stone from 1993 Heat and Batman Forever, both from 1995, would come. The latter was directed by Joel Schumacher, who referred to Val Kilmer as childish, making impossible demands and being rude to his colleagues. In 1996 came The Island of Dr. Moreau and Kilmer's opportunity to work alongside someone he had always admired, Marlon Brando. But what promised to be a rewarding experience ended in chaos. The film was a disaster. There were many problems during the shooting, and Brando ended up accusing Kilmer of confusing the size of his paycheck with the size of his talent. And not only that, the film's director John Frankenheimer stated emphatically, "There are two things I would never do again in my life. I'm not going to climb Everest, and I would never work with Val Kilmer again, not for all the money in the world." He also criticized his work ethic, and things never got resolved between the two of them. Sometime later, Kilmer admitted his sometimes violent attitudes were largely due to discovering mid-filming via television that his then-wife had filed for divorce. With the movie The Saint, Val Kilmer once again positioned himself as one of the stars of the moment, but his reputation took a hard hit. When it came out that he had asked during filming that no one make eye contact with him, loved and hated in equal measure, one thing was undeniable: Kilmer had created a solid, unique, and unprecedented career. The movies continued, but the 2000s found him in roles, often minor or of little importance. Meanwhile, the actor faced financial troubles, and his reputation as a rebellious, self-centered youth soon lost its charm. To play against him. Red Planet or Alexander the Great were some of the titles that featured him, but perhaps the most revealing was Kiss Kiss, Bang Bang from 2005, a film that earned him a Satellite Award for Best Supporting Actor. That was one of the few awards the artist would receive, despite having acted in a huge number of films. In 2009, Kilmer became interested in politics and expressed his desire to become governor of his home state, New Mexico. Although he obtained endorsements from certain individuals, the matter stalled. Regardless, those who had built him up as a cult star never stopped following his steps. And that's why it was a great shock when his arduous and terrible battle with cancer came to light. This brings our story back to the start. When it all began, the actor was living at the home of his former partner and friend, Cher. One morning, he woke up surrounded by his own coughed-up blood. His throat hurt and he could barely swallow. What followed was difficult and painful for both him and his surroundings. Kilmer discovered he had cancer and quickly took refuge in the faith his parents had instilled in him as a child. However, his loved ones insisted that he complement alternative medicines with more traditional methods. After weeks and weeks of debate, he agreed, stating that the other option, doing things his way, was equivalent to being alone. And the last thing he wanted was that. Kilmer had surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation in 2014. The surgery left him with a tracheostomy tube and a feeding tube. But the worst was the other thing. The treatment caused him to lose his baritone register. Years later, he would say he missed his voice, laughed like a pirate, and often didn't recognize himself. He mostly succeeded in living through this difficult period while avoiding the press. To heal and find peace, he distanced himself from acting and focused on painting and writing. He released a memoir and sooner rather than later agreed to be part of a documentary about his life. It was called Val, and it premiered in Cannes in 2021. There, the story of a person who had never tired of being true to himself and who had reinvented himself more than once was left astounded. However, although many did not know it, the actor still had a lot to give. The last years of Val Kilmer were marked by a kind of mystery. Despite a life of constant relationships, it was surprising the man had been alone for nearly 2 decades. He once described himself as an incurable romantic. Apart from his relationship with Cher, Val had had romances with singer Desley Ann Warren, model Cindy Crawford, and actresses Angelina Jolie, Daryl Hannah, and Ellen Barkin. He also had a relationship with actress Joanne Whalley, whom he married in 1988 after they met on the aforementioned Willow. From that marriage came his 2 children, Mercedes and Jack, born in 1991 and 1995, respectively. After battling cancer, Val Kilmer began appearing with a companion on his neck, along with a turquoise and coral necklace from his mother, whose loss also hit him hard. Despite beliefs that he wouldn't return to acting, the actor not only took on many projects but also appeared in the 2022 Top Gun sequel despite his physical limitations. There, he was able to show that he still had the gift to move and give the characters that depth that had so obsessed him throughout his life. For the scene in which he appeared, an artificial intelligence was used that was able to recreate Kilmer's original voice, something that moved everyone and that the actor simply described as a gift. "Now that I have difficulty expressing myself, I want to tell my story more than ever," he had said months before. With that participation, the public and critics re-emphasized his significance to cinema and art. On April 1st, 2025, at age 65, his family announced the star's death. The cause of death was pneumonia. Messages from other stars soon arrived. Everyone made sure to remember Val Kilmer as a committed person who, with successes and mistakes, had maintained an unshakable and honest vision about his own life and his profession. That boy who used to play making movies in his parents' house had finally climbed up to enter the homes of millions of people, whom he entertained and moved with performances that today form part of an immortal legacy.